opportunity to participate in this debate today. Could I thank the member for Worthing West, my honourable friend for Poplar and Limehouse, for bringing forward this debate during the course of our discussions today. I welcome also, if I may say so straight away, the government's action last night, and I think it will be helpful for the future. My concern, I think, relates to the concerns of other honourable and right honourable members about what happens now in the period between now and when any legislation is implemented, and what happens for those of my constituents and others who have faced some difficulties and challenges in the past. So difficult are the challenges that some of my constituents have faced that they don't want the estates and houses they've been involved in identified publicly, because they fear a further loss of income on any future sale of their property. But the concerns that have been outlined are extremely similar, Sir David, to those of other colleagues, and I just want to touch on those before I raise some specific questions for the Minister. The questions and areas of concern that I've had raised with me relate to a number of key areas. First of all, one that has been echoed already, which is the lack of information at the time of purchase. Secondly, the information and concerns around onward sale of leases to third parties. Thirdly, the issue of split sites and what's happened, and my honourable friend for Weaver Vale pointed to this in his intervention earlier. And fourthly, there's an element of devolution, and I want to just touch on that for the Minister as a whole. Firstly, Sir David, the lack of information. I feel like I'm in an echo chamber, because the points that have been raised with me are points that have been raised throughout the debate this afternoon, but which are worth repeating. My constituents, many of whom were purchasing on Help to Buy as first-time buyers, who were buying their first home, and were grateful to the Welsh Assembly and the UK government for helping them to buy their first home, have bought their first home and have been used forced to use solicitors recommended by the building company, have not had explanations of what freehold stroke leasehold means, have not had explanations about what the potential charges would be for them at some point in the future, never had it explained that those leaseholds could be sold on to a third party, and that might impact upon their finances at some future date, and have also, Sir David, been offered different prices by the same company for the same lease to purchase at the time. So I've had companies that have offered for the same house £1,500, £5,000 and £7,500 for the same lease at the same time at purchase. And people have said, well, I can't afford that now because I'm on a Help to Buy scheme. We'll undertake whatever you think is best for me. And that advice has been, well, have the leasehold, and people have found themselves on that. So I think we need to not just revisit that for the future, but also get some clarity from the Minister about what that means now for people who have undertaken that scheme recently. The question of onward sale is extremely important. And again, I know the Minister will deal with this matter as the future, and will look at the banning of the sale of leaseholds as a matter of principle completely. But I have a situation now where constituents of mine have bought the property, had the lease, bought it off of what they thought was a reputable company, and have now found that either the lease has been sold on to a third party, and shockingly, Sir David, they didn't even know or were not offered the chance to buy the lease at that time. So in one of the examples that I've got, only one person happened to see the managing director of the company, sales director of the company, on site and said, could I buy the lease? And it was sold to them. The other 21 properties were sold to a third party, and only later did they find out that sale had taken place. They were not offered a first point of call to purchase, even if they wanted to. And again,
So the thing I'm saying the law is, if they'd been in a residential flat, it could not have been sold without being offered to them, and that should have been the law for the houses, but I guess wasn't, because nobody imagined anyone would ever sell a leasehold house again.
Well, I'm grateful to the intervention and clarification from the honourable gentleman. And again, this is not about the future, because I'm sure the Minister is now exercised very clearly on a cross-party basis about what the future should be. This is about how we deal with the past. So, for example, in the case of the people who have wished to purchase those leases from the company that they only found out later had bought them, they have to pay not just a several £100 starting investigatory charge, but they've been offered not just the price of the lease, but also a £1,000 premium on the purchase of the lease. Now, these are people who are either, in many cases, first-time buyers or are people who have retired. And, in fact, one of the individuals was a former constituent of my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, who moved to my area from his to retire and has raised the issues with me and has informed the Shadow Secretary of State at the same time, my honourable friend, for Wentworth. So the question is what is the situation now with regard to buyback? What is the situation now regarding to a fair price on buyback? What is the situation now with regard to fair charges for buyback? And how will the Minister deal with those particular issues? I mentioned split sites, Sir David, because this is extremely important. One site in my constituency is a very big development site, and halfway through this development, this scandal has broken. The company in question has decided that, actually, let's get out of this quick. Let's forget this. Just try and limit our liabilities. We will sell the lease to the customer when buying the houses. So I've now got a situation whereby half a massive estate, literally, so 400 or 500 houses, half of an estate has leasehold with the company, which is now in place. The other half is being developed without leasehold. So for future sale, how is somebody buying the same house going to be able to sell that house in future when the other side of the street, as my honourable friend for Weaver Vale indicated, has a different tenant with a different quality in relation to the leasehold and with potentially different liabilities? Nobody would buy a house on this half of the estate in future if they could buy a house on that half of the estate without the leasehold being in place. So when I approached the company, which I will name in this case as Persimmon, whose, dare I say it, chief executive had a £118 million bonus this year, £118 million bonus this year. When I approached them and said, would they sell the leasehold or give the leasehold back to the constituents on the basis of the same principle, the answer came back no. They would sell the leasehold, freehold, for £3,750. £3,750 at a time when they're giving £118 million to the chief executive alone. Now, in doing that, again, these are people who have stretched themselves to buy the house in the first place and can't afford to buy that. So again, I said to the company, would they please ensure for me that they will not sell this on in the meantime? I had a letter back which says that, very gratefully, I'm sure, that's sarcasm for Hansard's purposes, just in case it appears as real, that we will not sell the ground rent to any third party until at least 2 years following the purchase of the leasehold. In the circumstances, we're prepared to confirm a minimum date of the 14th of July 2019, being 2 years from the date of our meeting. So they've said, Persimmon, that they will not sell the leasehold on for the next 2 years, but there's no guarantee beyond that. And these are constituents of mine who can't sell the house because over the road there is a similar house with a freehold sold, and who find it difficult to buy the 3,750 because they're already stretched accordingly. And I say to the Minister that this is really important as well for the government, because these are on Help to Buy, many of them. And when the value falls, not just the constituents struggle, but also the government loses out on any potential future sale. The last point I just want to make, Mr. Sir David, is relation to my own personal circumstances. My constituency is as near to England as the south side of the River Thames is to the House of Commons. We are literally 2 or 3 miles away across the border. My honourable friend for Alden Deeside, who was here earlier, is in a similar situation. All of the houses built in my constituency, the majority of them, not all of them, the majority of them have been built by companies based in Manchester in the northwest of England. I'd like to know from the Minister what discussions he's had with the National Assembly for Wales, who have devolved responsibility for housing issues, about his proposals and the future plans. Because again, I simply say that if he bans the practice in England, then does he ban the practice for companies based in England, or does he ban the practice for sites that are based in Wales? If he brings in regulations, what is the parallel consequence for the National Assembly for Wales? Because my constituents are using this, the schemes and the sites, and are buying materials that have been essentially made, and the profits are going to England. The policy is developed in England, and I think there's a need to clarify that. And I want him to just tell us what's happening with the Welsh Assembly. And finally, Sir David, I give him 3 solutions. I think he should work with the National Assembly for Wales and also in England to give a definitive right to buy to constituents of ours who have the leasehold with a third party or with a particular company. I think there's even an argument for him to put real pressure on to have a right to give away now as part of the price. Really do. I really do. Because in my case, house prices are being sold at the same price in the constituency with freehold as they were sold with leasehold. And that is, simply not tenable. It's an extra profit, an extra piece of profit they've gained out in a company that already can pay its chairman £110 million a year. I also think there needs to be a price cap looked at, potentially on both the cost of any leasehold, if he can't find a way to get it done freely, but also a price cap on the charges that might still accrue if he can't solve that problem for future generations, because it is not acceptable for a continued rise in the price of leasehold in the future. And he could, if he wished, legislate to freeze that price at a price that is now, if he can't find a mechanism to compensate people secondly. And I think also, he could also look at, potentially, help to buy for those people who are in a house on help to buy, but now wish to actually buy what they thought they bought in the first place, which was the land on which the house is built. And if there's a mechanism whereby he can help support financially people to help to buy the lease, that would be an extremely good contribution. I welcome what he's done to date. I know we're in a pickle and in a mess. I'm relieved in one way to know that this is not just Delling constituency in North Wales, that there are many other people, but there are real challenges for those who are in this mess. And the government and the Welsh Assembly have a duty and a responsibility to try and resolve it.